So 1 Kings 19, and this is Ahab coming back, and Ahab has actually been beaten back to Jezreel by Elijah, and something is going to happen now when Jezebel hears about all of this. Because now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. That could have been the turning point of his life. That could have been his road to recovery. But no, he goes and shares it with Jezebel. He's like a little kid, but sibling rivalry, and there's always one kid in the family who's always ratting out the other kid or the other kids, and in a situation like that. And here it is. He's very childish in his behavior, but keep in mind that most of these kings are very childish and very self-centered because they have been brought up in an environment where, as we would say today, they're born with a silver spoon in their mouth. They're brought up in an environment where they're just filthy rich, they're all powerful, everybody's a yes person around them, everybody's afraid of them, and so we see right here that Jezebel really is the one who's running the whole operation, because he goes back to her and just rats out Elijah. And he really did know better. He knew what Elijah was capable of doing. I mean, he's been a witness to the 450 prophets of Baal. He's been a witness to the fire coming down and just ripping apart that whole altar and consuming all the water, and yet in light of that, and then Elijah has prayed to God and the rain has come back, in light of all that, he still goes back, and it's like none of that made any impact on him at all, but it could have been the turning point of his life, and it wasn't. And what he's going to go back is he's going to go back to Jezebel. Remember, 450 prophets of Baal ate at her table, and so you're not going to have a few people at dinner tonight. Like 450 of them are missing. So he told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with a sword. Well, all that Elijah had done may have included the altar and all of that took place and the praying for the rain, but that falls on deaf ears with Jezebel. She could care less. She has no inclination towards God. She's a completely immoral, idolatrous woman. So, verse 2, then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. You see, Elijah has already come back, and she knows where he can be found, and so she sends a messenger, saying, so may the gods do to me. She doesn't even say anything about God. So may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them. She's talking about the 450 prophets of Baal. By tomorrow, about this time. And what she is saying is, this town ain't big enough for the two of us. Get out of town or die. And what she's saying, and it's really, unless she just didn't send an armed force there and just try to cut into pieces right away. She does have a feeling that I better give him an opportunity to escape. So she gives him 24 hours to get out of town. And it works. Look at verse 3. As we're looking down through verse 8. Verse 3, and he was afraid and arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. That's the southernmost boundary, but that's in Judah. So he's gone all the way from Jezreel, all through from north to south through the land of Israel, across the border into Judah. He's gone the entire section of Judah from north to south. He's down to the southern border, which is Beersheba. It's in the area of the dry, the area of the Negev, place we normally live, because It's very hospitable, climatic-wise, and you would think he'd be safe in the southern kingdom, but remember Jehoshaphat is king, and Jehoshaphat and Ahab have made an alliance, and there's another female member of that family whose name is Athaliah, living in the southern kingdom of Judah, so he probably feels like, I'm really not even safe in Judah, and so he continues to make a run for it. And verse 4 says, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, so even beyond Beersheba. And what you see is, here's a man who would be considered to be one of God's great men, that even God's great men have passions like ourselves and problems like ourselves. And here's Elijah who has a problem. He doesn't go to God. There's no indication that he has gone to God and that God has said, well, just take it easy, I'll take care of the problem. But he just takes it upon his own. He's afraid, he's in a panic, and he runs. And that's where he runs to. And he is really depressed, since depression is big in the news these days with Robin Williams. It will be for a while, then that'll pass and we'll forget about all of that. But coming down to verse 4, or verse 3, he was afraid and arose, ran for his life, came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die and said, it is enough now. O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Well, he has done pretty much the same thing before. This isn't the first time. He's always felt alone, even when he's talking to the 450 prophets of Baal. Back in chapter 18 and verse 22, he says, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord. And so he's, he gets down pretty easy and pretty fast. And that's what happens to him at that time. He may have even been of that mind as he flees down to the brook Cherith, and there's no rain in the land. And in any case, he has problems just like we have problems. And that's the beauty of the inspiration of Scripture. And that is that God's heroes are noted with all their flaws. Now, if a man was writing this, all of these super giants of the faith wouldn't have any flaws at all. They'd never be noted. It would be impossible for them to have flaws. I mean, these are the great men of God. But even the great men of God have flaws. And that's a good message for us, because that's an encouragement for us that even with all of our little difficulties of life and the flaws that we have, and sometimes they're big flaws, God still loves us and he wants us to do what is right. He's there to take care of us. And he's right here with Elijah. Elijah is just a little bit self-centered at this moment, but hey, we're not in his sandals. We're not making a run for it. We don't know the conditions of the time. We're talking about a very, very, very wicked woman when we're talking about Jezebel. So he lay down, slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him, and he said to him, arise, eat. So here's an angel. In the Greek, of course, angel is a transliterated word. It's angelos in the Greek. So, and it just means messenger. And I don't remember the Hebrew word for angel, but it means virtually the same thing, messenger. And it's one of those words that it gives you an idea as to the work of the individual, but you don't have anything more revealed about the individual. We'll look later on, we'll see the angel of the Lord when we're in Godhead, and some of the other times when we're in the text, we'll note the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord with a definite article from the angel is always seen as deity, so it's a form of deity who is a messenger as such. And then we'll just see angels. And Angels are always portrayed in the masculine gender. There are no female angels. And the angels that are seen are not angels that are flying around with wings. Until you get into the Revelation, you get some wings involved and all that. But the occurrences where we individuals talking to angels, especially in the gospel accounts, early on the gospel accounts, the father of John the Baptist, all of that, these are individuals that just look like beings in human form. So this is an angel, and this angel was there, and when it says behold, in the Greek when the word behold is used, it usually is a word that means, and John uses it in his 1 John, when it says we beheld him, that's a look with investigation. There's a word for just seeing someone. They came in the door, and it was just somebody came in the door. But when you behold him, or they are beheld, that look with investigation is, yeah, a guy came in the door, and he's about 6 foot tall, and he's got a blue shirt on, he's got black pants on, and, you know, there's more to the thought. So when we see behold here in this text, the indication is that something's just happened all at once. And so it's like, there was no one there, and then all of a sudden there was someone there, you see. And that's very much like the father, Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist, when he appears as he's about ready to offer the incense on the altar of incense, that all of a sudden there's this angel, this messenger, and he touches him, and the reason he touches him, he's asleep, so he's going to wake him up, and said to him, arise, eat. So God knows in sending of this messenger exactly what Elijah needs. Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. That would of course appear just as miraculously as the angel did. He made visible just in being in position, and there it is. Good food. So he lay down again, and the indication is that he's probably fallen asleep again, because if you look at verse 7, it says, the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. Now, because it says in verse 5 it was an angel, the definite article is not used. However, when you're looking at verse 7, the definite article is used, but I would believe that this is just, I don't know how to say it, just a regular angel. This is a deity as the angel of the Lord, because verse 7 is connected directly with verse 5 when it just says an angel. This is the same angel, because it says the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So here's a second feeding. He's getting rested. So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb. Now I'd say that's we talk about super drinks all the time, and Red Bull and all of that. And I guess I know Red Bull because I've never had Red Bull, but I know of Red Bull because of their great sponsorship in all sorts of sports events, and the fact that they're filthy, filthy, filthy rich. But sports drinks are a big deal, give you that punch. Well, this is just a little bit more than a sport drink. You realize what has been noted here? He is rested twice, and he has had something to eat twice, and it says in verse 8 that he rose, ate, and drank that second time, within the strength of that food, 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. That's pretty good food, pretty good drink to sustain him. But it's directly from God. And so Mount Horeb is where? Where's Mount Horeb?
Sinai.
Sinai. Yeah. It's Sinai. This is another word. It may be one of the peaks of the Sinai range. So he went to Horeb, the mountain of God, and then in verses 9 through 18, the Lord reveals himself to Elijah. Now that's interesting here in verse 9, because back in Exodus 33, verses 21 and 22, Moses is hidden away in a cave while God walks by. He covers him with his hand in the cave so that he cannot see the face of God. And as he walks by, he reveals his ethical nature to Moses. And Moses is the one who is really concerned about, can I lead this great people into the promised land? He's afraid. He's uncertain. Well, here's another situation where afraid and uncertain is Elijah. And isn't it interesting that he is directed to not a cave? In the Hebrew, it is literally the cave. Now, since it's referred to as the cave in the Hebrew, then the cave phrase must mean something to the Hebrew reader, to the Jewish reader. And the cave would line up very nicely with that is found in Exodus 33, verses 21 and 22. No way to know for sure, but you're dealing with two people who are uncertain of their future and really need the strength that God can provide for them to carry out their mission. And that would be Moses and Elijah. Now, did we ever see Moses and Elijah together? They live at different times.
Sure, Transfiguration.
Transfiguration. Now, isn't that interesting? And Moses and Elijah, Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets, they are again as the spokesman in the Transfiguration, providing what for Jesus? Why are they there? Why are they there in the Transfiguration?
To make the point that Jesus is the one they need to listen to now.
The what?
Jesus is the one they need to listen to now.
Okay. Is that going to be a comfort for Jesus?
Yeah.
I would think so. That could be a comfort for Jesus. So isn't it interesting that God comforts Moses, God comforts Elijah, and then in a sense there is within that appearance a comfort for, and of course, for those who are witnesses to the Transfiguration, an understanding that he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. So the law and the prophets represent that which is of the old. You've got an arrow pointing directly to who will establish the new, and in the process, providing the comfort for Jesus in all of that process. So verses 9 through 18 is the Lord revealing himself to Elijah. Then he came to the cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Well, again, that's accommodative language. God knows exactly what the answer is because he knows everything, so he knows exactly how Elijah will answer, but this is an opportunity for Elijah to figure some of these things out. He could have said, well, I'm here because I'm just scared to death of that wicked woman Jezebel. Or he could say, well, I just decided to take a journey down here. What's he going to say? But he's going to go back to himself, and when he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And the question implies, why would Jezebel cause you to be in such a panic? Did you not come to me? Of course, probably he didn't. And he said, I've been very zealous for the Lord. Well, you don't have to explain that to God. God knows just exactly how zealous you are for the Lord. But that's what he says. He's building himself a case. Very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant. You don't think God knows that? Well, yeah, he's just sort of reminding God. And you'll find kids that will do this. This is very childish, in a sense, very childish behavior. Because you'll see kids will say, well, Johnny down the street, he did all of that, and so I did it too. I mean, if Johnny can do it, can I do it? It's very feeble. But he's going to remind God how great Elijah, has been. You don't have to do that. The sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, torn down thine altars, killed thy prophets with the sword, and here it is, really, right here. Here's the problem. I alone am left. There it is. I'm all by my lonesome. Well, you are. You're never in a minority when you are with God and God is with you. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So he said, this is God in response, go forth, stand on the mountain before the Lord. That's exactly what Moses was going to, that section of Exodus 33, 21 and 22. And behold, the Lord was passing by. That's exactly what God did with Moses. Now, Moses wanted to see the very kabod of God, the very glory of God. But here, this is just going to be a comfort. And strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. In other words, the very presence of the Lord can bring about an awesome display within nature. This is God's doing. But the Lord was not in the wind. In other words, that is not essentially who he is. He is not essentially, he can be when he needs to be, but essentially his makeup is not that of being a destructive person. And after the wind and earthquake, same thing. Well, that'll shake Elijah up a little bit, pun. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. The Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. Gentle blowing. Go back to Exodus 34. And look at what God reveals to Moses. Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. Then the Lord passed by in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness and in truth. There's your gentle blowing. That's where God is. Who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children and the grandchildren to the third and fourth generation. And that is also a message of comfort right there. You might say, well, he went from all those positives to a negative. He ends up with, no, he doesn't end up with a negative. He's still positive, because for the righteous ultimate separation between the righteous and the unrighteous. The righteous are living in a very unrighteous world, and isn't there some relief from all of this nonsense that's going on around me? And yes, the answer is there. that God takes care of it. Of course, when you're looking at Exodus 34, verse 7, you want to add Exodus 20, verse 5. Exodus 20, verse 5 says, just sort of a tack on, of those who hate me. Otherwise, you're going to have problems when we come to Ezekiel 18, when we find out, well, the sons are not responsible for the sins of the fathers, and the fathers are responsible for the sins of the son. So he's noting the individual responsibility in Exodus 20, verse 5. Now you're going to ask the question, well, you may not. Why doesn't he say it here? Well, he doesn't have to. He's already said it before. We should have remembered it. So, but we didn't. So we'll tack on Exodus 20, verse 5 right there. But this is the gentle blowing. This is the comfort. This is exactly what Elijah needs. Now, this is not the first time we've seen a thought in God's communication that's like this. Go back to 1 Samuel 3. 1 Samuel 3. And note the account in 1 Samuel 3, verses 4 through 10, when God is speaking to Samuel. What do you think his voice is like?
God's?
1 Samuel 3, verses 4 through 10. What do you think the voice of God is like right here? Just, let's read it. Then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am." Then he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, lie down again." So he went and lay down, and the Lord called yet again, "Samuel." It's not Samuel. Gentle voice, one that you would really pay attention to. And people will respond much more quickly to a gentle voice, a gentle rebuke, than they will someone screaming and hollering at them. And so I would imagine that every time that the Lord comes, and he comes to him 4 times. Down here in verse 10 of 1 Samuel 3, it says, "Then the Lord came and stood and called another time." The Lord came as other times. And here it says, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel said, "Speak, for thy servant is listening." So now he's taken the advice of Eli. That's God talking to you. I'm not talking to you. I'm waking you up. And that's the gentle voice. That gentle voice is the sound of a gentle blowing right here. So going back to 1 Kings 19 in verse 13, you can see that even with all of that, it's going to have an effect on Elijah. It came about when Elijah heard. Well, what did he hear? He's already heard a strong wind. He's already heard an earthquake. He's already heard that, probably envisioned a fire, but then also he's heard a gentle blowing. And that sort of calms people down. Don't we like to sometimes, if we're close to the coast, go and just sit on the beach, and when the rollers are coming in, when there's an offshore breeze coming in, just sit there and just relax and let the noise and the gentle blowing wind relax us. And when it's hot in the house, don't we like to open the window late in the evening and just have a gentle wind blowing through the house? It's a little bit cooler than the heat of the day. And so this is a very soothing, very comforting. And yet in all of this, in verse 13, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle. In other words, he's going to cover his face, and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I love it because this is the second time God has said this, you know. What are you doing? What God has demonstrated to Elijah right here is His power. And that His power is not always found in the great movement of mass. It can be. He has the power to do that. And so it really takes the case of Jezebel and it really shrinks into insignificance. Why? I mean, is Jezebel more powerful than this? Is Jezebel able to soothe you with a gentle blow? I mean, why are you here, Elijah? And he knows, God knows why Elijah's there, but he wants Elijah to come to a position where he understands that, well, I think I was a bit hasty in running away from Jezebel. Because God's with me, He's going to take care of me. And from that point on, there's not going to be a Jezebel fear on the part of Elijah. So this is a good lesson for Elijah. And so this is the second time the question is asked by God, what do you really fear? Go over to 1 John 4, make a little bit of an application here for ourselves within our time frame. And go over to 1 John 4, and we'll take a look at other things. 1 John 4, verses 16 through 18. And it says, "And we have come to know and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love, and the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this love is perfected with us, that we may have confidence in the day of judgment. Because as He is, so also are we in this world." I pose you back to 1 John 1, verse 7, walking in the light. "There is no fear in love. The perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. We love because He first loved us." And so, what are we waiting for would be the question right here. Elijah takes his time out. He gets himself recharged, but he could have just continued on with the work. He'd gone to God right away. There's no indication that God would have refused that prayer or not listened to it. God, we would assume, would have taken care of him. But here we have a moment, and Elijah finds out really what he's all about. And it all comes back to I alone am left. And there's lots of people in this world that believe they are alone. But if you really, truly understand what God is all about, and you're in the right relationship with Him, you're never alone. Never alone. Where can I flee from Thy presence? David says. Jonah finds out in the belly of the great fish prepared that God's going to take care of him, and He does. So verse 14, again, after God says in verse 13, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Then he said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts." He's going to repeat exactly, virtually, what he said back here in verse 10. He doesn't quite have the message yet. "For the sons of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, torn down thine altars, killed thy prophets, and with the sword, and I alone am left." Here we go again. "And they seek my life to take it away." At least he's consistent. He says the same thing that he said before God revealed himself in all of that went on. God is just, does it give up on this particular line of discussion. He knows Elijah better than we know him as he's revealed in Scripture. But he's going to talk to Elijah about, well, let's get on with the business. And so here's the business in verse 15. And the Lord said to him, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. So it's time for you to head north again. Now he's going to go to the wilderness of Damascus, which is going to be really on the east side of the Jordan. When he fled south, he was on the west side of the Jordan as he went down in a straight line. And now as he comes back, and remember he's coming from Horeb, he's coming from that Sinai region, wherever that region is. There's it's sort of a geographic mystery. We have a Sinai Peninsula that has been named as such because people early on believed that Mount Sinai is at the tip of that peninsula. But then we also have the right arm of the Red Sea, which is the Gulf of Aqaba, as it's known today, that points directly up towards the Dead Sea and up through the Jordan Rift, geographically in that area. And there's some thought that Sinai may have been found actually as they crossed that right arm of the Red Sea, because it'd still be the Red Sea, and that area is the area of Mount Sinai. So there's some interesting discussion going on geographically, and probably when you look at it in OT1, you'll take a look at that newer view that has come into being. It may be. It really doesn't matter. But he's going to go to the wilderness of Damascus in verse 15. And when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram. So this is God's choice, and he is the one who's going to be responsible for the anointing of Hazael. However, that's not going to take place until we get up into 2 Kings 8, and in 2 Kings 8 verse 13, it's going to be Elisha who will do that. So a little bit of a preview. He's the one who receives the mantle of Elijah. He's the one who carries on in the same spirit as Elijah, and so it will be Elisha, but the command is originally given to Elijah. Verse 16, and Jehu the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint king over Israel. That's going to happen in 2 Kings 9, verses 1 through 10. Again, that's God's choice, and that will be done by Elisha's servant. And Gehazi is his name. You shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat. Now it mentions Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. So here's three commands that are given that Elijah must either do or initiate or pass on to the next great individual. That would be, of course, Elisha. And it shall come about, verse 17, the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael. Hazael is going to be the new king of Damascus. That's what was noted back in verse 15. Jehu shall put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha, shall be put to death. So he draws all three characters that are noted in verse 16. He notes them, brings them all together in an occurrence: escaping from the sword of Hazael, being put to death by Jehu, escaping the sword of Jehu, being put to death by Elisha. So he connects all three of them right there in the next verse. And then verse 18, he makes a very interesting statement that we just really love when we read it, because on at least two occasions Elijah has said, I alone am left. Verse 18, just as sort of a P.S. to this divine letter. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Now, what's so significant about kissing Baal?
That's worshiping.
Yeah, what's our Greek word for worship? Proskuneo. And what does it mean? Kiss Lord. So to kiss Baal is to worship Baal. So that's what's being noted right here. And so in verses 19 through 21, we have Elisha's call. Now we're introduced to another individual. So he departed from there and found Elisha the son of Shaphat while he was plowing with 12 pairs of oxen. Don't get that mixed up in your mind that he has a 12 oxen team pulling a plow. That's not necessary. You just need 2 oxen to pull a plow. But there are 12 pairs of oxen working the land. It's like harvest time, wheat harvest in the Midwest. What do you find on the road many times when you're traveling?
A bunch of combines.
Combines, yeah. Combines. And those combines travel from area to area, and they will go ahead and work a field. There'll be a number of them working one area, and they'll get it done that much quicker. So this is a very arduous task right here in plowing, and he has one of these 12 pair of oxen, because it says he with the 12, and Elijah passed over to him and threw his mantle on him. Now his mantle is his cloak, and so that has to be a surprise for Elisha. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah, Elisha does, and said, "Please let me kiss my father and mother, then I will follow you." And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" Now verse 20 virtually has a repeat someplace else with different people.
Talking about Jesus and the disciples.
Yeah, when Jesus is calling the disciples. And there are some, before the sending out of the 70, there's an indication there's 3 would-be disciples, and one of them carries with the idea of, well, I need to go home and bury my father, with no indication that the father's even died. So there's counting the cost of discipleship. In this particular case, he tells Elijah, "Let me kiss my father and mother, then I will follow you." And he said, "Go back again." What I have to, in other words, what he's saying is, it's got to be your free choice. You've got to choose to follow me. Now, you run the risk by not keeping me in sight, but if you want to go back and kiss your mother and father, that's fine. If you don't want to go back and kiss your mother and father, that's fine. Verse 21, so he returned from following him, took the pair of oxen. This is called burning one's bridges in the vernacular of today. That comes from thoughts like Gaius Julius Caesar, who invades Great Britain, and as soon as he has all the ships up on the shore from crossing the English Channel, he sets them on fire. The idea is you're either going to make it here or you're going to die here. So that's the only choice you have. There is no third choice in getting back in the ship and going back to the continent. It's do or die. And so Elisha, even though he's going back to kiss his mother and father, he's going to burn his bridge. And of all the apostles, can you think of any single apostle who really burned his bridge when he went and followed Jesus?
Paul.
Who?
Paul.
Well, let's go back to the original 12.
Judas.
Well, he hanged himself, but I guess that's the old one.
Matthew,
Tax
probably.
collector.
Matthew,
Matthew, why Matthew?
because he can't be a tax collector.
Yeah, he'll never be able to go back. He has left that position. Now you've got 4 two sets of brothers who are in business together, who are fishermen, and they do go back. They can go back to fishing, but Matthew's the one who really burned his bridge. And some of you have done that sort of thing in coming here. Before I went to Sunset, Barbara and I just bought a house, the first house we ever had. And we were just nice and settled in, had not been in there for even a year. And went down and visited Sunset with a friend. Had no inclination of doing anything like that, but was so impressed with what I was involved in and what I heard in the classroom down there. I came back and said, we're going to need to sell the house. We're going to go to Sunset. And she never hesitated for a minute. She said, okay. She's always been that way. Always. Going to go to New Zealand, okay?
What year was that?
65. We were the third Anglo class in Sunset. It had been a school for Spanish-speaking students up to that point. And it was a good school. Sadly, he's gone astray. Anyway, as we're looking here, he burns his bridges. In verse 21, took the pair of oxen, sacrificed them, boiled their flesh with the implements of the oxen. The implements, usually all of that equipment is made out of wood and leather for pulling the plow. And gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and followed Elijah and ministered to him. And so we come down to chapter 20, and in chapter 20, we're going to now have our attention drawn to back to a fellow by the name of Ben-Hadad. And Ben-Hadad is the king of Syria, capital city of Damascus. We know the time frame for these kings of Syria, and so this would be Hadad the Fourth. So there's a bunch of them. Hadad the Fourth. And so this is going to really be entitled Ahab's First Syrian Campaign in your syllabus there on page 15. Samaria is going to be besieged by Ben-Hadad. Because now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, gathered all his army, and there were 32 kings with him, and horses and chariots. He went up and besieged Samaria and fought against it. Then he sent messengers to the city, to Ahab, and he's going to have some arrogant claims right here in verses 2 through 12. Thus says Ben-Hadad, verse 2, your silver and your gold are mine. Your most beautiful wives and children are also mine. And the king of Israel answered and said, it is according to your word, my lord, O king, I am yours and all that I have. He just capitulates. Just gives in right there. Well, that doesn't mean that he's going to surrender and then be taken off as a captive. That just means I'll pay this. This will be the ransom price. This will be the price that I can pay you to make you go away. It's almost like blackmail, but it doesn't work in modern times, and it never worked in ancient times, because once they've got some of your money, they say maybe he's got some more when they start to run short, and they'll always be back. And so, okay, whatever you say. Then the messengers returned and said, thus says Ben-Hadad, surely I sent to you, saying you should give me your silver and your gold and your wives and your children. But about this time tomorrow I will send my servants to you, and they will search your house. Second demand, the first demand was very vague and very general. The second command is definite and immediate. And that just sort of rubs Ahab the wrong way. Who is this guy? Well, Ahab, you're in a pretty poor position because you don't even go to God anymore, if you ever did. And you got an ungodly wife. So I will send my servants. This is the second demand to you. They will search your house and the houses of your servants. Shall come about whatever is desirable in your eyes. They will take in their hand and carry away. So we're going to just take everything. Then the king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, please observe and see how this man is looking for trouble. For he said to me, for my wives and my children and my silver and my gold, I did not refuse him. But you see, it would be Ahab who would determine. Let's see, I've got a bunch of wives. Well, it's always amazing to me that he's got wives when he's got Jezebel. That's because he didn't include Jezebel in that.
Nobody wants
Ben Hadad was said, I don't want her.
Yeah, nobody wants
But she's not even in the mix right here. And it's always amazing to me that Jezebel would allow him to have other wives. Well, maybe she gets tired of him very quickly. Maybe she had other men. I don't know. I wouldn't doubt it. And, which children are we going to get rid of? Well, we'll get rid of that wife and that wife and that wife and the kids that go along with her. But the choice was his. But the second demand, the choice is not his. He's going to lose it all. And so this man is looking for trouble. I did not refuse his first demand, is what he says right here. And so in verse 8, and all the elders and all the people said to him, do not listen or consent. That's the solution to that. So he said to the messengers of Ben-Hadad, tell my lord the king, he's going to be very respectful, all that you sent for to your servant, at the first I will do. But the second demand, you see, but this thing I cannot do. And the messenger departed and brought him word again. Ben-Hadad sent to him and said, may the gods do so to me and more also. Is that terminology we've already heard before? Jezebel. If the dust of Samaria shall suffice for handfuls for all the people who follow me. What he's saying is, I will destroy Samaria so completely, there won't even be enough left in dust to go around to all of my soldiers. There won't be enough dust that is left. That's pretty proud and arrogant, isn't it? Then the king of Israel answered and said, tell him, it's getting a little bit heated right here. Tell him, let not him who girds on his armor boast like him who takes it off.
That's like, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Yeah. This whole section right here, the proverb right here, it's just 4 words in the Hebrew. Just 4 words in the Hebrew. And he's saying, no fight, no victory. So put up or shut up, he would say. And don't count your chickens before they hatch. And it came about when Ben-Hadad heard this message as he was drinking with the kings and the temporary shelters, that he said to his servants, station yourselves. So they stationed themselves against this. So bugles are blowing, men are being aroused, everybody's getting ready to fight, everybody's getting ready to pound Samaria into the dust. And in verses 13 and 14, the Lord intervenes. Now behold, just all of a sudden, a prophet approached Ahab, king of Israel, and said, thus says the Lord, have you seen all this great multitude? Oh, yeah. I've looked over the wall. It's a huge army. And it was a huge army. I mean, it was an army that was large enough that he had within it 32 kings. These would probably be kings of city-states. 32 kings who were with him, and horses and chariots. Yeah, I've seen this multitude. So the prophet is speaking to Ahab, and he says, I've got a message from God. Have you seen all this great multitude? Behold, I will deliver them into your hand today, and you shall know that I am the Lord. This is really, we talked about being at Mount Carmel, and that was the time when he could have turned his life around. Here's a second opportunity. God just keeps trying and trying and trying and trying. Not messing with his free moral nature, but he tries and tries and tries. And he still does it today. He will just, in his infinite patience, just try and try and try to present himself, maybe through your mouth, as you're speaking to someone who's a non-Christian, or the mouth of others, but over and over and over and over and over again. How many opportunities, how many times does it take for God to say something before it will register and we'll say, oh, yeah. So, this is what the Lord is saying. You shall know that I am the Lord. And Ahab said, by whom? In other words, how's all this going to work? It's almost like Gideon who wants a sign. And so, by whom? So he said, thus says the Lord, by the young men of the rulers of the provinces. Then he said, who shall begin the battle? And he answered, you. So don't wait. Don't wait for them to sling the first stone. Don't wait for them to loose the first arrow. You go out and take them on. So, verses 15 through 21, that's what he's going to do. He listens. He really doesn't have, he has a choice. He can capitulate and surrender. But if he's going to live, he's going to survive, he needs to follow God. And so, verse 15, he mustered the young men of the rulers of the provinces. There were 232. After them he mustered all the people, even the sons of Israel, 7,000. And they went out at noon. While Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the temporary shelters with 32 kings who helped him. That was real smart on the part of Ben-Hadad. But he probably felt so superior. He said, I can beat these guys with both hands tied behind my back and besotted with alcohol. Okay. Verse 17, the young men of the rulers of the provinces went out first, and Ben-Hadad sent out, and they told him, saying, men have come out from Samaria. Then he said, if they come out for peace, take them alive. If they come out for war, take them alive. Well, that sort of hamstrings your soldiers. They're not going to immediately attack them. So these went out from the city, the young men of the rulers of the provinces, and the army which followed them, and they killed each his man, and the Arameans fled, and Israel pursued them, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, escaped on a horse with horsemen. That may not look like to you anything significant, but kings normally don't ride on the horses. They ride in a very ornate chariot pulled by horses. So this means he had to get out very quickly. So he grabbed the nearest horse and went out with the horsemen. Verse 21, and the king of Israel went out and struck the horses and chariots and killed the Arameans with a great slaughter. Now, I probably noted it for you before, but I'll note it again, that horses are a no-no among the Jews. And the reason for that is, and it's constantly noted within the text, the reason why horses are a no-no is because they were always considered an offensive weapon of war. An offensive weapon of war. And it's just like giving somebody a truckload of nuclear missiles. If you give them to them, they might just use them. So if you have horses, you might just use the horse for war. Because that's all the horse was used for. It was not used and in pulling a cart, it was not used in pulling a plow. Horses were not used for that. Horses in this day and age, in this time, always used for warfare. They were either pulling chariots of war, or they were being ridden by individuals as just a horse developed for war. Always used as an offensive weapon. And the Israelites are given permission to be on the offensive when they conquer the land. And once they conquer the land, you don't see of God saying, go out and do this and this and this. You do right here. This was an offensive move on the part of, they went from defense to offense on the part of God having them come out of Samaria and take on the Arameans. So the victory is given, verses 15 through 21, and the Arameans receive great slaughter, and Ben-Hadad leaves. Now, coming down in your syllabus, you're going to see in 1 Kings 20 and verse 22, Ahab is going to be warned, and this is going to be the second Syrian campaign. Then the prophet came near to the king of Israel, said to him, go strengthen yourself and observe and see what you have to do. For at the turn of the year, the king of Aram will come up against you. So the idea is go strengthen yourself, and strengthen yourself more than likely carries with the idea of get your equipment all together. So if you have armorers who are making weapons of war, if you collected a bunch of the weapons of war from the Arameans, because all of these weapons were generally very individualized, not standardized weapons. You had your own weapon, you had your own shield. Your shield might not look like the guy who's right next to you. You charged in a very loose formation. There was not much organization to any of the battles. It was these guys overwhelming these guys because these guys were more and they were screaming louder. All of that. But King of Aram is going to come up again at the turn of the year. The turn of the year is significant because ancient armies didn't like to fight in the wintertime. Well, no army likes to fight in the wintertime. But in more modern warfare, you fight in the night. In the wintertime, you fight at night, and that was just not done among ancient armies. You didn't fight at night; you couldn't see where you were going, and you didn't fight in the wintertime because it was just uncomfortable. But when spring came, well, that was the time to get revitalized. That's the time to go to war. So at the turn of the year, he's coming back. He's going to go back home. He's going to equip himself, and he's going to come back against you. Verse 23, the Lord's going to promise victory again to Ahab. Verses 23 through 28, the servants of the king of Aram said to him, their gods are the gods of the mountains, therefore they were stronger than we, but rather let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. Now, the king of Aram is an idolatrous king. He believes in a theory that's called, for want of a better term, localized gods. Localized gods. And a localized God was even perhaps hoped for with Jonah, as we're going to see later on, when Jonah tries to get away from God. And the localized God means that if you're a Syrian, then there's a God for Syria. Or if you're of Sidon and Tyre, there's a God for you there. Or if you're a Philistine, there's a God for you there. So these are localized gods. And we'll see, we'll have hints of localized gods and belief in localized gods as we go on and we look at different accounts. And anytime I say localized God, that's what I mean, is that just like the Assyrians here, they believe the reason why they were conquered was because the God they were using at that time was a weaker God than the God of the Israelites. Because their gods are gods of the mountains, therefore they were stronger than we. But let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we will be stronger than they. Because our God is a god of the plains. And that would go along really well with chariots. Chariots were not a weapon that ever was a super weapon that really won the battle. Chariots were originally used just for scouting purposes. And they very seldom were used in battle one against the other. The Persians used chariots against the Greeks. And much to their dismay, the Greeks had a recourse that they used and pretty well took care of the chariots. Actually, when they'd be charged with the chariots, the Greeks formed a phalanx. The phalanx is a formation of men that's 16 men wide, 16 men deep. And they'll carry very long spears up to 20 to 22 feet in length. And the first 4 to 5 ranks lay their spears over the shoulders of the ones who are in front of them. Then as a body, a block of men, they march right for the enemy line. Well, what you see coming towards you and all their weapons are standardized among the Greeks. What you see coming at you is a wall of shields with a whole bunch of pointy objects coming in your direction. And so it was generally enough to take care of any disorganized force. So the Persians decided that they'd go after the Greeks with chariots. And this was in Alexander's time, and Alexander always had an answer for most anything that was happening military-wise. And when the chariots were on the charge, the phalanxes opened up. And they opened up and gave them a straight avenue all the way through the phalanx. And then when they got through, guess what they did? They closed up. When they closed up, they took the riders, they took the ones in the chariots with spears and arrows and everything else, and then they just destroyed them, so there were no more chariots. So the chariot was never really a great weapon of war. It was designed to instill fear in the enemy, but it wasn't all that effective. But they're noted, and so they're going to have their gods of the plains who are going to give them the victory, so they believe. So here's the second time. Verse 24, and do this thing, remove the kings from his place and put captains in their place, and muster an army like the army that you have lost, horse for horse and chariot for chariot. Then we will fight against them in the plain, and surely we shall be stronger than they. And he listened to their voice and did so. So it came about at the turn of the year that Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. And the sons of Israel were mustered. Mustering means bringing everybody together. And were provisioned and went to meet them. The sons of Israel encamped before them like 2 little flocks of goats, but the Arameans filled the country. So the Jews, Israelites are really outnumbered. Then a man of God came near. We've seen a prophet coming here, but this is a man of God. Came near and spoke to the king of Israel, that would be Ahab, and said, thus says the Lord, because the Arameans have said the Lord is the God of the mountains. In other words, what he's saying is God's taken offense. The Lord is a God of the mountains, but he is not a God of the valleys. Therefore I will give all this great multitude in your hand, and you shall know that I am the Lord. Here's the third occasion that Ahab could have changed his life. It's just sort of a gimme relationship. You know, just keep doing these things for me, God, but I'm not going to give anything in return. Very self-centered relationship on Ahab's part. And so the victory is found in verses 29 and 38. So they camped, verse 29, over against the other 7 days. It came down the 7th day. The battle was joined. Sons of Israel killed with the Arameans 100,000 foot soldiers in 1 day. But the rest fled to Aphek into the city, and the wall fell on 27,000 men who were left. It's like we just can't get away from God. And so that's the second Syrian campaign. Now, Ben-Hadad, the Ben-Hadad of this time, and we assume it's still Hadad the fourth, is going to be captured by Ahab. And so in verse 30b through 34, Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city to an inner chamber, and his servant said to him, Behold, now we have heard the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Please let us put sackcloth on our loins and ropes on our heads and go out to the king of Israel. That would be an indication of what? Sackcloth on our loins and rope on our heads. Submission. Yeah. This would be an indication, a physical indication of submission. This would be the dress of a servant. And so we are going to serve you. Also a penitent thought of wearing sackcloth. So they girded sackcloth on their loins and put ropes on their heads and came to the king of Israel and said, Your servant Ben-Hadad says, Please let me live. And he said, Is he still alive? He is my brother. Oh, Ahab. You'll never learn. Verse 33, now the men took this as an omen, good omen, because he said, He is my brother. And quickly catching his word said, Your brother Ben-Hadad. Then he said, Go, bring him. Then Ben-Hadad came out, and he took him up into the chariot, like taking him out to lunch. And Ben-Hadad said to him, The cities which my father took from your father, I will restore. There's no biblical record of that. That's Omri, father of Ahab. And you shall make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria. This is Ben-Hadad talking. And when it says streets for yourself in Damascus, that means there will be area in Damascus that will be found for the Jews to live in. So Damascus becomes one of those cosmopolitan cities that we have in the ancient world, where generally you have people of different ethnic groups living, but they live in different quarters of the city. So if the city is divided into quarters, you have this quarter over here where the Arabs live, this quarter over here where the Jews live, this quarter over here where the Greeks live. And when we come all the way down to that time when we find the Septuagint version, it comes out of Alexandria, North Africa, we find a very large Jewish element in the city of Alexandria. And they have become so prominent within the city of Alexandria that they want a Greek translation of the Hebrew of the Old Testament. And that becomes the Septuagint version. So they're very powerfully inclined. And so that's what he's talking about right here, making a street. In other words, a street or a neighborhood is the idea. And it's going to be in Damascus. And so just like there was one in Samaria for those who were Arameans or Syrians, there'll be one in Damascus. These guys are really making the covenant. And I will let you go with this covenant, Ahab said. So he made a covenant with him and let him go. Now, this is Ben-Hadad who's come up against you twice. And each time, God bailed you out. Is that about right? That'd be a correct assessment? Yeah. So this is not going to go over well because there's no indication in Scripture that God said, now I want you to go get Ben-Hadad. I want you to get a hold of him, bring him up into your chariot, make a covenant with him. No, Ahab is not going to go to God. He's just going to decide to do this on his own. And so that's what he does. And of course it's going to meet with a lack of pleasure on the part of God. So we look at the top of page 16 in your syllabus. It says, Ahab rebuked for sparing Ben-Hadad, 1 Kings 20, verses 35 through 43. Now a certain man of the sons of the prophets said to another by the word of the Lord, Please strike me. But the man refused to strike him. Well, then he would have disobeyed the Lord. So this is a word picture. This is a show and tell, we would say today. Then he said to him, because you have not listened to the voice of the Lord, behold, as soon as you have departed from me, a lion will kill you. And as soon as he departed from him, a lion found him and killed him. Then he found another man and said, please strike me. And it would be the same condition. It would be by the word of the Lord, like it was in verse 35. And the man struck him, wounding him. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way and disguised himself with a bandage over his eyes. And as the king passed by, he cried to the king and said, your servant went out into the midst of the battle. I was one of your soldiers. And behold, a man turned aside and brought a man to me and said, guard this man, for if any reason he is missing, then your life shall be for his life, or else you shall pay a talent of silver. And while your servant was busy here and there, he was gone. And the king of Israel said to him, so shall your judgment be. You yourself have decided it. So it's a just judgment. Then he hastily took the bandage away from his eyes. The king of Israel recognized him that he was of the prophets. And he said to him, thus says the Lord, this is the prophet talking to Ahab, because you have let go out of your hand. See? What's the judgment? You are the man, Ahab. What's the judgment? Whom I had devoted to destruction. That's God speaking to the prophet. I did not want Ben-Hadad left alive, but the choice was yours, and you let him stay alive. Therefore, your life shall go for his life, and your people for his people. So God says, I bailed you out twice. You've not turned to me. That's very much noted within the scripture. And besides, when you had Ben-Hadad, I did not tell you to capture him. It's very much like Saul and Agag and the Amalekites. And Samuel saying, what is this that I hear, the bleating of sheep? Oh, the people made me do it. Sheep for sacrifice. And what about this king Agag? Did I not say all the Amalekites? Well, he's my war trophy. Didn't tell you could have a war trophy. Well, he doesn't say that, but that's probably the reason why he spares him, because that's what the kings of those days did. And they would bring them back, and they'd have them eat at the table, and then they could show them off to visiting kings and all of that nonsense. So that's a judgment that Ahab really, really pronounces upon himself. And so he is rebuked for sparing Ben-Hadad, and that goes down through verse 43. Verse 43 says, so the king of Israel went to his house, sullen and vexed, and came to Samaria. Those are the marks of a spoiled child. Sullen and vexed. Oh, come on, let's see a smile on your face. No, I'm never going to smile with you. Oh, come on, cheer up. No, I don't want to cheer up. And we're going to see a little bit, we're going to see in chapter 21 what that sullen and vexed nature of Ahab will do when he's around Jezebel. I mean, how it affects Jezebel. We're going to see him in just a moment come into the house, slam the door shut, run into the bedroom, throw himself on the bed with his face to the wall, and that's a spoiled child. So we come down to 3 years of peace with Syria after this in chapter 22, verse 1. 3 years passed without war between Aram and Israel. So 22:1 would belong right before chapter 21 as a result of all this that has gone on. And if we're looking at it chronologically, that's why it's that way within the syllabus. So we come down to the main heading on page 16 of Naboth the Jezreelite and Naboth's vineyard here in 1 Kings 21, verses 1 through 3. So Ahab is living in a time of peace and prosperity, and I suspect absolute boredom. You know, when you have, and of course I've never noted this, and probably you not either, But when you have everything in the world, and there's nothing that you can't buy, or there's nothing that you can't somehow get, then doesn't life seemingly, wouldn't it become boring? And wouldn't you then go seeking some excitement in your life? And aren't there people who, in trying to seek that excitement in their lives, turn to alcohol and drugs and anything that will pump them up? And of course, Robin Williams, and he's in the news right now, suffered depression for a number of years. And when all of the medicines that they give for depression don't work, then you start going around looking for your own alleviating of the difficult. Cocaine, heroin. These guys are no different. They may not have the cocaine and the heroin, but they do have drugs. They know what drugs are. They certainly got alcohol. Alcohol content among the ancients is not as great as it is today, because we can enhance the alcohol content through refrigeration and through other means in the fermenting process and make it stronger than this. And alcohol generally, when we're looking at wine, was cut with water so that one would not get drunk. And don't let anyone ever tell you, well, they drank wine because the water was bad. They knew what water was bad. They knew what water was good. If you're out with your donkey and you come to a pool of water and there's a bunch of bones laying there bleaching in the sun, then you probably don't want to water your donkey in that pool of water. I mean, that's very obvious. The ancients aren't dummies. They figured that out. And if there are other individuals who drank the water on a particular well and made them sick, that word spread around very quickly that don't drink out of that well, the water's not good. But they had good water. They had fresh water. They had an immune system that was built up to be able to drink waters that would absolutely horrify us. I remember being in India and going down Long River and seeing some boys down there with the water buffalo, the buffalo that they were using that were used in the farm, and they were down there in the water washing them, and as they were washing them, they'd reach down, scoop up some water, and drink the water. If I did that, I would have turned skeletal in about 15 seconds. No immune system to take care of that. They've got the immune system. So when we're talking about the use of alcohol in the first century, don't believe that argument, well, the water was bad. No, they drank alcohol because alcohol was a part of their life. They drank it, those who were righteous individuals drank it with the idea of not becoming drunk, but they drank it and probably passed it around to the children, but it would have been not much more than water that was flavored with the alcohol. When Jesus turns water into wine, he doesn't turn it into grape juice. I know that bothers some people because they are trying to find out, well, Jesus condoned drunkenness. No, he didn't. He did not. It's a sin. So anyway, here's a vineyard. Looks good. Vineyard looks good. Ahab's bored. And he's in Jezreel. It came down after these things that Naboth the Jezreel, that's about 25 miles from Samaria. So it's probably a summer home. The elevation may be a bit different, it may be cooler there. There was always an afternoon breeze that would come in off the Mediterranean, and this may be open to that breeze. If you ever go to Charleston, South Carolina, you'll see that the original houses that are built down near the harbor all have porches and openings that face the harbor. And that's because at a certain time during the day, there's a nice cool breeze. That's in the days before air conditioning. So you'd open up the house and the breeze would come through and cool the house down so that you could sleep that night. Well, same way in the Mediterranean, that cool breeze. And so Jezreel would seem to be a summer palace. And so he's in Jezreel. David the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. So all Ahab had to do was go out on the wall of the palace. Palace is always built higher than the next higher house because he's king. He's up higher than everybody else. He wants to look down on the people. And so he looks over the wall or looks out the window, and here's this beautiful vineyard. Very well kept, very nice. And so Ahab decides in his mind, he's got everything else, and he decides he wants it, so he's going to covet it. And so Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden. So you're going to tear out that vineyard, make it a vegetable garden, because it is close to my house. I mean, I got another vegetable garden, but it's half a mile down the road, and I don't want to walk that far. But it's right next. It's convenient. Because it is close beside my house, and I will give you a better vineyard than it in its place if you like. I will give you the price of it in money. So he thinks that that's a good deal. I'll pay you for it, or give you another piece of land. And, so he's going to have to now transplant all that, and you don't transplant easily that which is. But that's not the problem. Here's the problem. Naboth is still a righteous Jew. And this is what Naboth says in verse 3. Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid me that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. Leviticus 25, beginning with verse 23. Leviticus 25, beginning with verse 23. And what he is saying, when he says, the Lord forbid me, that would indicate that he still believes in God and God's law. The law will not allow me to do that. The law is a safeguard for land staying within the family. I can sell it to a member of the family, or it could be taken over by a member of the family, but it stays within the family. And Naboth the Jezreelite and Ahab are not related. So, can't do it. Verse 4, so Ahab came into his house. Here we go. Sullen and vexed. There we go. Because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him, for he said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and ate no food. That's childish behavior. For those of you who are parents, you recognize that. I always tell fellas, the quickest way to take care of kids slamming their bedroom door shut is to take the door off the hinges.
Amen.
That takes care of it. That takes care of the problem. You don't have a door, it can't be slammed. And teenagers especially just detest the idea of not having a door that can be closed so that they can have their privacy. So that's what he does. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, how is it that your spirit is so sullen that you're not eating food? And what she's saying is, I mean, I've seen you depressed before, but that never kept you away from the table. And now you're away from the table? You're not going to even eat food? You are in bad shape. What in the world has caused you to be this disturbed that you're not eating? You know, you're Mr. Eat everything on the table and ask for seconds, and you're not eating? So he said to her, and you can almost hear him sobbing when he says this, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me a vineyard for money, or else if it pleases you, I will give you a vineyard in its place. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Well, he didn't say it that way. He said, the Lord won't allow me to do that. I'm keeping the law. Well, what's the law of Ahab? Jezebel. That's what the law is to him. And look at the remark by Jezebel. You can just hear the acid dripping from her tongue. Jezebel, his wife, said to him, do you now reign over Israel? He says, are you a man or a mouse? And he goes, sweet, sweet. He's a mouse. Arise. Here's her solution. Eat bread. Let your heart be joyful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Very determined woman, a very wicked woman. You take her words very seriously because she believes might makes right. She lives by the iron rule. I want it, I get it. You get in the way, you're dead. So this is her solution in verse 8. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal. You think she's running things? Seal usually is in like a signet ring or in something that's around his neck. He'd be the only one who would have access to it. She has access to it. Sent letters to the elders and the nobles who were living with Naboth in his city. Now she wrote in the letters saying, proclaim a fast and seat Naboth at the head of the people. Seat 2 worthless men. Make sure you get worthless men. We want top quality A1 liars for this. Seat 2 worthless men before him and let them testify against him, saying, you cursed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. Solution. So the men of the city, what are they going to do? This is a message with Ahab's seal. Besides, even if they suspect that it's Jezebel, they're not going to cross her. And this is in the Summer Palace area. This is in Jezreel. So the men of the city, the elders, and the nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them, just as it was written in the letters which she had sent to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth at the head of the people. Then the 2 worthless men came in, sat before him, and the worthless men, remember, everything is confirmed at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So here's your 2. Oh, isn't it interesting if they would, feel like keeping this part of the law, but not anything else. And the worthless men testified against him, even against Naboth before the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. Wait a minute. The king very loosely worships God or even thinks about God. Jezebel gives him no thought at all. But it's the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent word to Jezebel saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And it came about when Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned, was dead, that Jezebel said to Ahab, arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead. And it came about when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, that Ahab arose. I can almost see him skipping down the lane, can't you see? Oh, joy. Oh, it's mine. Arose to go down the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. But Ahab's joy is short-lived, verses 17 through 24. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, arise, go down and meet Ahab, king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Now, in Samaria means that he is the one who normally rules in Samaria. Because he's not in Samaria right now. He's in Jezreel. So he's just identifying Ahab, king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. And you shall speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord, have you murdered and also taken possession? And you shall speak to him, saying, thus says the Lord, in the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, the dogs shall lick up your blood, even yours. Now, remember the dogs, they're just sort of mobile garbage disposals among the ancients. They're not generally kept as pets, but they have a purpose and a place. And Ahab said to Elijah, have you found me, O my enemy? And he answered, I have found you. because you've sold yourself to do evil. Bad translation, trying to get everybody to understand that the word evil in a text like this is really ra, R-A in the Hebrew, and it is more in the area of that which is dysfunctional. Now, dysfunctional can be, in a moral sense, evil, so it can be in that sense. But you have a problem because if you translate the word ra every time as evil, and then you have God presenting dysfunction, now you've got people saying, aha, I knew it. God is the originator of evil. Well, he can be the originator of dysfunction, and that's different. So in one sense, it can have a moral implication. In another sense, it does not have a moral implication, because God cannot sin. There's no moral implication with God's dysfunction. A great event of God's dysfunction, in contrast to that which is tov, which is good in creation, is the flood. And is seen as evil, actually dysfunctional, for those who die in the flood. And when you find calamity coming, sometimes that word's used, calamity, sometimes when you find calamity coming upon a people, it's the ones who are being destroyed as a result of their sin to see it as evil, but it's just really dysfunctional. And so you're either functional or dysfunctional. That's very much in keeping with the thinking of the Jew, because the Jew thinks in the concrete, and thinking in the concrete rather than the abstract would place a great emphasis on it works or it doesn't work. It's functional or it's dysfunctional. And it's not always in the area of morality. So you've sold yourself to do that which is dysfunctional in the sight of the Lord, Ra. Behold, I will bring Ra upon you, and will utterly sweep you away, and will cut off from Ahab every male, both bond and free in Israel. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. Remember? Only lasted one generation after Jeroboam. And like the house of Baasha. Remember? Only one generation after the reign of Baasha, the son of Ahijah, because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger, and because you have made Israel sin. That thought right there is interesting. In provoking God to anger, one of the quickest ways to provoke God to anger is to cause someone else to sin. And one of the ways that one can get involved in the sin that affects a lot of people, and I know it almost sounds far-fetched, but it's not, is in the division of the church. When you're over in the writing to the Corinthian church, and that church has so many difficulties that are division-oriented, and when you're looking at 1 Corinthians 3, for instance, it's talking about what you're actually doing to the church when you are causing dissent in the church. Verse 16 of 1 Corinthians 3 says, do you not know that you're a temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? He then moves on to, if any man destroys the temple of God, within this, and now not true in 1 Corinthians 6 where he's talking about the body of the individual. But here he's talking about, in reference to the church, it says, if any man destroys the temple of God, which would be the church, God will destroy him. For the temple of God, the church is holy, and that is what you are. That really brings about the wrath of God. And that's very much like what we're looking at right here in verse 22 of 1 Kings 21. Because he said, because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger. Well, God, how did he provoke you to anger? Because you have made Israel sin. You get in there and you stir the pot and you cause difficulty and dissension, you cause people to sin. Jesus says it would have been better for a millstone that had been tied around the neck of the individual, and the individual thrown into the water. God takes it very seriously, and has always taken it very seriously. And so, Ahab, you're in big trouble. In verse 23, and of Jezebel also has the Lord spoken, saying, the dog shall eat Jezebel in the district of Jezreel. Going to eat her. You're already going to be dead. They're going to take care of your blood, because they're going to wash out his chariot. We'll see a little bit later on. Because he's killed in battle. The one belonging to Ahab who dies in the city, the dog shall eat. The one who dies in the field, the birds of the heaven shall eat. That's typical phraseology concerning the disposal of garbage. Verse 25, it goes on to say, well, actually, we jump down to verse 27. And it came about when Ahab heard these words, we'll come back to 25 and 26 later on. It came about when Ahab heard these words that he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and fasted. And he lay in sackcloth and went about despondently. Look at verse 28. This is our loving God who sees into the heart of every single individual. We would have said, you mean forgive Ahab? Oh, come on now. I mean, he looks like he's asking for forgiveness. Looks like he's repenting. But really, come on now. He's not. That's not with God. God knows. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, do you see how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring the evil. That's, again, our this dysfunction. I will not bring it in his days, but I will bring the upon his house in his son's day. So the original indication was earlier that Ahab. Now, Ahab's going to be killed in battle. That is true. We'll see it a little bit later on. But the original indication was that Ahab was going to suffer the disgrace of his house being ended and his knowing that his house was ended. And since he repents, God says, no, it won't be his house that will end in his lifetime where you'll see it. It will be his son's house. His son's no better than Ahab, because all 20 of these kings are rotten to the core. And of course, God has always known that. So Ahab repents, and then we're going to see the third Syrian campaign. Now remember, in the first two Syrian campaigns, he's been successful. He's been successful because God has intervened and has been there for him. Even when he's not asked for God, he's been there and has intervened on his behalf. But now we've got a third Syrian campaign, and there's a city that is called Ramoth of Gilead that was originally the territory for the northern kingdom of Israel. But the Syrians have come in and captured it. So Ahab is going to go to Jehoshaphat. Now Jehoshaphat is who?
King of Judah.
King of Judah. Do they have a connection?
His daughter's married to
Daughter, Athaliah. Yeah, there's the connection. So he's going to go, Ahab's going to go to Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat's going to join him in battle, and it's going to be a disaster for Ahab. And so Ahab will come to an end. But what we're going to do is we're going to stop right there, and we're going to pick it up right there in the middle of page 16. Have you gone back to, what's his name?
Oh, what's